Ah, fuck. Oh, shit. Ah. I was trying to do a funny walk-on bit where I go, ooh, Dungeons and Dragons, and I kicked my dismantled rat cage and it fell over. Anyway, if this is the first of my videos that you've ever seen, that's a decent introduction to the whole energy of this channel. Hello, spicy adventurers of the Forgotten Realms. I'm Spice8rack, aka using my bonus action this combat to say all of this, and welcome back to the channel. In summer of last year, is it summer of last year? Summer of this year. I've been working on this video for a little while. Time has become convoluted in my head. In the summer of last year, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms was released. This was a Magic the Gathering set that tied into Wizards of the Coast's other most famous property, D&D, and showcased the world of D&D through the format of collectible Magic the Gathering cards. A concept that could only be made dorkier if there was some kind of NFT Ponzi scheme attached to it. But now I'm thinking about it, something like Magic Arena or Magic the Gathering Online is like on the cusp of just being fucking NFT top trumps. So honestly, we're already in the dork hole now. Let's just dig deeper. This set is naturally chock full of references to things, places, people, and spells that you will find in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. And I had a lot of fun making my Throne of Eldraine video, where I went through and analysed all of the mechanical representations of all of the literary references that existed in that set. Although hopefully this time around I won't do the head-breakingly bad mistake of assuming that Excalibur and the Sword in the Stone are the same thing and some kind of cultural plot hole. In my defence, both things are British and as such should be treated with the maximum contempt forever. Before I begin, there are some cards that I am not going to talk about in this video. The first kind of card are the cards which aren't direct references, but of course by nature of existing as cards in the D&D set are in some way references. Like the Split the Party card is a reference to the fact that you shouldn't split your party up during an adventure. That's the amount of analysis that card deserves. And if I did that for every single card in this set, I wouldn't be sitting in front of my camera right now. I would still be writing my script and being very sad about it. The second kind of card that I'm not going to talk about, or at least I'm not going to talk about at length, are cards like Monk of the Open Palm and Planar Ally. These are cards that are references to very specific things within various D&D manuals. Planar Ally is a spell, Monk of the Open Palm is a subclass, but these cards don't really do anything noteworthy or worth analysing for me to talk at length about them. Their references very much exist as this name appears in the book. Again, I would not be sitting in front of my camera if I was writing about all of these in depth. I would be very sad and my fingers would hurt. However, as I hope you can appreciate by the very girthy time code that's currently beneath me, we are going to still be covering a whole host of cards in this video. There are a multitude of cards that do very interesting, very noteworthy, or very confusing things when it comes to translating mechanics, spells, locations, or indeed entire adventures onto pieces of cardstock. So with those two thick caveats out of the way, come with me now as Spice8rack analyses all of the D&D references in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, featuring Lily Simpson. Gotcha! I don't know if I got you, but I hope I did. But you know what? I might not have got you, but you certainly got me. Oh. Anyway, we're going to talk about the fucking white cards to start with. Whoa! So, fun fact, the cleric costume that I ordered didn't actually show up, so this is what we will be dealing with for the first part of this video. Can you tell that I got like really overzealous with the C? You know when you're like writing a birthday card, you're like, happy birthday, Samantha Thompson, and then by the time, like, I don't know, you get to like the H, you realise you've got less than half an inch to fit the rest of the letters in, so you just start cramming them. That's why I've ended up with a C nipple. This is why I earn the big bucks. So the first card on the list is the +2 mace. Now, if you've never played a game of D&D before, you might think that the name of this card is some kind of syntax error, but +X weaponry does indeed exist in the world of D&D. They are very simple magical weapons that add +X, where X is the number of whatever, like, you know, +1 will add 1 to your weapon roll to hit, and also add 1 to your damage roll should that weapon hit. They're very, very simple magical artifacts, and for the most part, this mace seems kind of fine. You know, it adds +2 to attack. That makes sense. It is a +2 mace. However, there are some inconsistencies with how +2 weaponry appears in-game and how it appears on this card. For example, +2 weaponry does not give you any kind of bonus AC, your armor class, or any kind of bonus hit points, so the +2 mace giving +2 toughness doesn't really make sense. Also, this is a very minor nitpick, but +X weaponry begins at its lowest at uncommon rarity, and that's a +1. +2 weaponry is actually rare in D&D, and yet the +2 mace is actually a common item here in Magic the Gathering, which just bugs me far more than it should, frankly. I will say, however, I do enjoy the flavor text on this card. Oftentimes you can forget that +X weaponry is, unless specified otherwise by your DM, inherently magical, and so you can use +X weaponry whilst dealing with creatures that have magic vulnerabilities, for example, to great effect. Our next white card is Blink Dog. Okay, so Blink Dog is very much a does what it says on the tin type creature in Dungeons and Dragons. It is a dog that can teleport up to 40 feet to a place that it can see. Now, in Magic, the term blink colloquially means something a little bit different. If you blink something in Magic, usually you are exiling it either for the entire turn, when it comes back at the end of turn, or temporarily. You exile something and then it immediately returns. And I like how the game's designers have taken the Blink Dog's mechanics in D&D and translated them into being accurate to Magic the Gathering's use of the term blink, or at least its players' use of the term blink. There are a couple of inconsistencies with how Blink Dogs appear in-game and how they appear on the card, but for the most part it is either minor or it's actually to a benefit of the comparison between the two pieces. So for example, one negative inconsistency is the fact that Blink Dogs are in the monster manual fey creatures, and so really ought to be fairy dogs on Magic the Gathering cards. The other inconsistency is in the art between the Monster Manual and Magic the Gathering. The Magic the Gathering art, I think, is actually a benefit to the to showcasing what Blink Dogs are actually like in D&D. They are lawful good creatures, and I feel that this art is expresses that a lot better than the art you'd find in the Monster Manual, which makes the Blink Dogs look a lot meaner, a lot more vicious, a lot more evil than they actually are. Sorry, the other Blink Dog art was supposed to turn up there when I said oh! Moving on to the Book of Exalted Deeds. This card doesn't really have too much in common with the D&D item that it is named after. The Book of Exalted Deeds in D&D does stuff like it gives you a halo, it increases your wisdom, it lets you cast more powerful cleric and paladin spells, but really only that last one has gotten any kind of look in here, seeing as Conjure Celestial is a spell you can more easily cast with this tome in D&D, and the card does make angels, so that does make some degree of sense. Now, originally, I couldn't really work out why this card had the line of text, your opponents can't win the game and you can't lose the game on it. There's nothing in the Book of Exalted Deeds item description which makes you unkillable or immortal or anything like that, but then I realised that the Book of Exalted Deeds gives you advantage on persuasion checks, and as any DM knows, any player character who knows how to abuse persuading their way out of death is practically unkillable. Dancing Sword. Oh, I'm so glad I decided to film this video instead of just recording it, because now I get to do little bits like this. I don't know when I'm gonna stop. I guess me in the editing booth will make that decision. Okay, please stop now, please stop. So, of course, you don't have to die. Your player character doesn't have to die whilst wielding dancing swords for it to become a creature in-game. That would make it one of the worst items in the entire manual. What I would have preferred to have seen on this sword to make it more of an accurate representation for how it actually works in D&D is more of like a razor boomerang type mechanic where you detach the sword from a creature, it becomes a creature itself and then reattaches to said creature at the end of the turn. I would, however, like to take this moment to point out that literally every single item, character, location, etc. that I talk about in this video is 100% visually accurate to how it is portrayed in, the monster manual, in the player's handbook, in the Dungeons Master Guide. All of the items themselves are one-to-one recreations. It's to be expected. Wizards of the Coast owns both Magic the Gathering and D&D. It would be weird if there was some kind of visual inconsistency, but I do want to give props where props is due. Big up the art department for that specific thing, and not for another specific thing that we will talk about later. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Dawnbringer Cleric and flavor keywords. Okay, so there's not a whole lot to say about this card specifically, but it is the first card sort of like in this list that uses flavor keywords, which I just adore. Normally, if you're playing a game of Magic and you see a little bit of italics preceding some rules text, like Raid, for example, it's shorthand for you need to attack with this creature or attack with a creature in order to have this effect pop off. Now, the flavor keywords in this set are very different to that. There are absolutely loads of them, and I think aside from pack tactics, all of them are just there literally for flavor, for a little bit of flair. But it makes my job so much easier to see a card like Dawnbringer Cleric, see these three abilities and go, oh, this is obviously a Cure Wounds analog. Oh, this is obviously a Dispel Magic analog. I love these flavor keywords. I love how, we got a glimpse of the idea of them before on one of the playtest cards from Magic the Gathering's Mystery Boosters. And, ooh, they're just lovely. Thanks for putting them in the set, folks. Yay. What is this? I don't know what this movement is. Divine Smite is our next card, and if we're being charitable, obviously the Divine Smite in D&D is much more based around damage than any kind of banishment effect, but Divine Smite does affect creatures that would end up in either red or black alignments a lot more than it would otherwise. However, of course, that has nothing to do with exiling something and then bringing it back. A much more true to flavor version of this card would be some kind of combat trick where it gives a base of +2 and +0 to whatever target creature that you are casting the spell on, but then giving it an extra +1, +0 and first strike if your opponent controls a red or a black creature. This would have made the card a lot worse, but we do love to kick white while it's down. Speaking of, Flumph! Whilst this creature is an aberration in the monster manual, meaning that it would more likely be classified as a horror as opposed to anything else. Flump is, even in the monster manual, described as looking a lot like a jellyfish, and so it having that creature tag makes perfect sense to me. I have zero complaints there. Hey yo, it's your boy, Shaved 8-Rack. I'm in the editing booth, and I completely forget to mention in the shoot that the entire reason that Flumps have, or this Flump card has the ability that draws you and your opponent's cards, is because that Flumps in D&D can share positive mental energy and mental information with their allies, but also negative mental energy and mental information with their enemies. Of course, there's no sort of damage based on card draw on this card for your opponents. That would have been outside of White's colour pie, but even so, that is the reason why that card has that mechanic. In fact, the only negative part of this card from my perspective is the fact that a 0/4 defender that draws your opponent a card is considered a rare by White's standard in Magic. And we can't even use the excuse that, oh, but White has to have weird card draw, it can't have normal card draw, because this set gave it normal ass card draw for the first time ever. It perplexes me so. Our next card is Gloom Stalker, which is actually a subclass of the Ranger class, as you can find in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, a book that I needed to pick up as a business expense for the creation of this video, which counts as me producing work that I am being paid for. Gloomstalkers are to Dungeoneers what Dungeoneers are to normal people in the world of D&D. They are well versed with delving into any hole that they wish. That wasn't even in the script, and I could tell as I was saying it that it was not coming across the way I wanted it to, and yet I finished the thought anyway, because I commit. But yes, Gloomstalkers do indeed have abilities like Dread Ambusher and Umbral Stalker, I believe it's called, which would make them far more suited to dealing with and fighting against the kind of lurking ropers that are mentioned in the flavor text of this card. Guardian of Faith is our next card, and when I first saw it, I thought that there had been obviously some kind of mistake, because Guardian of Faith is a spell, and yet this creature, well, it's a creature, so how did that happen? And then I remembered that in Magic the Gathering, all creatures are spells as you cast them, and it makes sense for a spell that summons a creature to just summon a creature in Magic. This is a suddenly appearing spectral knight that will go above and beyond in order to protect a specific creature, and whilst phasing out as a concept isn't really something that exists within this spell in D&D, I think otherwise it is an entirely just representation of this spell in Magic. Minimus Containment. Okay, so Minimus Containment isn't a spell in of itself, it is a subset of the Imprisonment spell, which is a 7th level enchantment? Put that up on screen and prove how right I was. Nailed it! The way that Minimus Containment works is that it imprisons, or it shrinks down a creature to about a 1-inch size and then imprisons them in some kind of gem or jewel. Whilst this card shouldn't be able to target non-land permanents, it should just be able to target creatures, I do love how it then creates, or it then becomes a treasure token for your opponent, which they can just sack for mana. Not really like a particularly flavorful representation of how this spell works in D&D, but it is really, really fucking cold, and I love it. Alright, I've fully lost my notes for Portable Hole, but that's okay, because I have memorised my complaints about this bloody card. First off, we'll start with the positive. Portable Hole exiling a creature with a low mana value makes entire sense, because the hole is, I believe it's a 6 foot by 10 foot pit that requires a DC 10 strength check to like escape from. So small creatures, you know, like weak goblins or bugs or something like that getting caught in the hole makes complete sense. What I am furious about, however, is that the fact that this card does not contain the mechanic of, if this card exiles a card named Bag of Holding, or a card named Bag of Holding exiles this card, target player loses the game. Because when you put a portable hole in a Bag of Holding, it rips a hole in the universe, destroying both items and probably everybody within a 20-foot radius. They are cowards. Wizards of the Coast are cowards for not putting this mechanic in, and I will be having words with them the moment that they respond to my emails. White Dragon, and whilst we're here, we might as well talk about all of the other blooming colours of dragons. Why not? Each of the different colours of dragon in D&D, and there are technically 10 of them. You've got the metallic dragons, which tend to be good, which, well, are good, and then you've got the chromatic dragons, which tend to be, or just are, evil. So you've got white dragons, which have ice breath, green dragons, which have poison breath, black dragons, which have acid breath, blue dragons, which have lightning breath, and red dragons, which of course have fire breath. And for the most part, I completely agree with all of these different representations of these different breath weapons as they are. Of course, in D&D, all of these breath weapons will deal damage first and then have some kind of secondary element. So, for example, you could be frozen in place by the frost breath of the white dragon, but it would still deal you a bunch of damage before it does that. Obviously, damage has been removed from this card because giving white the ability to just like deal damage when a big dragon enters the battlefield, or like giving blue the ability to deal like 4 damage or whatever, it seems like that would be a big problem. That would be a little bit more, a bit busted, I would go so far as to say. Fun fact about all the different chromatic colours of evil dragons, they are evil in different ways. For example, like green dragons are evil in the capacity that they are manipulative schemers. They are much happier pitting army against army, general against general, king against queen, than they are going about their evil deeds like themselves. Whereas red dragons are far more happy to get stuck in, burning towns, getting money, as one very good DM said one time.
Yeah, that's me. I bet you're wondering how I ended up in this situation, talking about all of the D&D references in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms and not yet mentioning a single legendary character that is presented in this set. And that's because I'm a big dummy dum-dum who needs his whittle diaper changed. Outside of what information is contained in books like The Player's Handbook and The Dungeon Master's Guide, I have a very limited understanding of Dungeons & Dragons' vast lore. It would be foolish, nay, churlish of me to attempt to analyse any of the mechanics of these cards and compare them to a lore that I simply have no material grasp of. However, I do have a good pal and fellow YouTuber who does. So without further ado, may I introduce the ever wonderful Lily Simpson, who is going to use her encyclopedic knowledge of Dungeons & Dragons lore, history, and story to take us through each of the legendary characters as they appear and tell us whether their card matches their character.
So my name is Lily Simpson. I have that name on every platform that I'm on now because I decided it's just easy that way. My YouTube is predominantly based around trans content. However, I am currently looking at going into doing D&D lore videos. So this is actually surprisingly well-timed as an appearance can go, I think.
So the first character on the list in terms of how they appear in the set is the Grand Master of Flowers. So this is a legendary planeswalker with the subtype Bahamut, which I hope I'm getting right.
The Grand Master of Flowers is... obviously, it's a title, and within the lore there's actually a few Grandmaster of Flowers, so there's multiple ones of them that this could possibly be referencing. Based off the subtype that's using here, it's obviously, the assumption here is going to be that it's referencing one that is a transformed version of Bahamut, or one that could become an avatar of Bahamut, because of the way they can transform into the Dragon God. Originally, the first mention of it was from Salvatore's Bloodstone Lands, and they're basically, at their core, Grandmaster of Flowers is just a very senior and powerful monk. So the ability to summon monks of the open hand makes sense. They're the leader of a monk order. They can summon monks, basically, if they wanted to. Being able to ensure that a target creature can't do something is effectively probably trying to emulate the stunning strike that monks have, using their ki to stop people from being able to perform for a turn. So that both of those track as far as monk abilities go. turning into a 7/7 dragon god creature with flying and indestructible isn't a common monk thing. That seems specific to this guy, who, based off purely off the fact that he's been given the Bahamut, subclass thing, seems to indicate that he is potentially Bahamut transformed into human form, or is able to become Bahamut given enough power or whatnot. Bahamut absolutely can travel planes, and basically, honestly though, almost every powerful god creature, or even high-level player characters and wizards can travel through planes. So it's not that special. It's not that special in D&D to be a planeswalker. That's kind of a thing that a lot of people do.
I think the unspoken part of not the unspoken part, but rather like the very explicitly spoken part is that all of the planeswalkers in this set aren't planeswalkers in the same way that planeswalkers in other sets are. It's kind of confusing, but the lore of this is that, for example, like this Grandmaster of Flowers, Bahamut, isn't going to be able to like travel to Innistrad or Ikoria or anything like that. They're just kind of extra special characters. But yeah, like if they can turn into a dragon god, it kind of makes sense for them to be a planeswalker, absolutely. Okay, so next we have Icing Death Frost Tyrant.
Okay, so Icing Death's real name is actually Ingaloa Stemazilian.
That would not fit on a card, fair play.
Which Icing Death is like the name that the dragon uses when it's basically around non-dragons, effectively, or is the name that was given to it by the people of the stories that it's from, because it's from the classic series that really established a lot of D&D lore, the Drizzt Do'Urden legend written by R.A. Salvatore. Icing Death appears in the Crystal Shard and is killed by Drizzt and his little barbarian friend Wolfgar. And basically the dragon dies from an icicle dropping on it and killing it. But they are accurate in the fact that from Icing Death's hoard, Drizzt got Icing Death his sword, because he has two swords. He has a flaming sword and an ice sword. He did get his sword, Icing Death, a frost tongue weapon, which, I mean, it is it being a +2/+0, that makes sense. It's an offensive sword that deals damage, and I'm assuming that the tapping thing is meant to simulate it doing ice damage to people. They appear as a thing that Drizzt and Wolfgar need to go through, so that Wolfgar can get his horns to challenge his tribe, so that he can become the leader. And it's a antagonist within the series, but doesn't have a huge impact.
Next, we have Oswald Fiddlebender, which is something I'm pretty sure I got called at school by my bullies.
So, this was actually one of the cards I was like, oh, that's actually kind of funny that they did that. I'm happy they did this. Was Oswald Fiddlebender is he makes appearances in the Icewind Dale video games. And the first time you meet him is in the crashed out wreckage of his airship, which has crashed basically into a mountain. He has a few like dialogue lines, and doesn't think he has any massive quests with him, but basically he's there to sell you trinkets, clothing, and like potions, which is, I mean, his like whole idea of like doing like magical tinkering, where basically it's like, I guess it kind of like buys into the idea of him being like a basically a vendor in the game. I feel like sacrificing something, i.e. selling something, to then get something that you can then use, kind of adds up. I'm like, okay, that sort of makes sense. He also then appears in Icewind Dale 2 again, where he drives your party around a little bit, and then the airship crashes again. Yeah, he's 0 for 2 on the airship not crashing.
And then, additionally, of course, like, we're missing all the legendary artifacts, but also the legendary, like, Nadar, I think is the third boy on the list.
Well, see, that's the thing. Nadar, Hammer, and Varys are all made up for the party and made up for the set. Eliwick is not made up for this set. They made a brief appearance in a web supplement for the PHB 3.5 edition. There are brief appearances in there. Like, all it really mentioned was like a little bit about like their character as part of like the supplement, because it was a bunch of new ideas introduced that were based around their character, like around the character. But like, it was barely nothing at all. All the stuff on like the lore for the character is made up for this set.
Wow, I had no idea. I just straight up assumed that all 4 of them were generated for this set specifically.
And with that very convenient segue, the U series of cards are a series of examples of sort of like snapshots of one particular group of adventurers wandering through the lands of the Forgotten Realms. They present the sort of choose your path style mini narratives, which very much for me evoke the fighting fantasy game books that I very much read to death when I was a kid and still have a couple downstairs. Every single one of these cards has the same party on it. You've got the Dragonkin Paladin Nadar, you've got Eliwick Tumblestrum, who is of course the Planeswalker sort of like face card of this set. You have Hamar Pasha, who is a human wizard, why would you ever play a human? And you have the Half-Elf Ranger Varys, all of them appearing either in the background or the foreground on all of these you choose your own adventure style cards. And even in these cards there are references to very specific pieces of iconography from D&D's history. In, for example, you come across a cursed idol. That art, the statue in that art, is a representation or a reference to this particular piece of D&D artwork from, I believe it was 2nd edition. Let me just double check my notes. I said, let me check my notes, and I checked my notes, and I haven't written what edition the handbook's from. I've just written old as balls. So thanks, pre-production me, for preparing me well to answer my own fucking question. I do love the story that these branching narratives do tell. Even if one of them seems completely out of nowhere, only has one option on it. Not sure what the deal with that one is, but I guess that's just a mystery for the games designers, eh? Somewhat less delightful, however, is the fact that Eliwick herself specifically is represented pretty inconsistently across all of the pieces of art that she is in. In some she is brown-skinned, in others she is very clearly white. And indeed there is an earlier version of the Planeswalker art that Steve Prescott drew that does have Eliwick as very clearly a white character. Looking at this from the outside, it seems like WotC made the decision to change Eliwick's character design at such a late stage in development that they couldn't even get all of the artists who had already drawn art of her on board in time to give her a consistent presentation in this set. Now, I'm not qualified as to whether or not this counts as tokenization, but it does seem at best sloppy and at worst wildly disrespectful to make the decision for your face character of your set to be a brown woman at such a late stage in development that you can't even get the majority of the art depicting her redone. I mean, in a way, this is just kind of a meta reference to the fact that both Magic the Gathering, D&D, and indeed Wizards of the Coast in general has a history of weird racism. So, anyway, let's talk about class cards now, shall we? Fully realised that I didn't have a Dungeon Master costume, whatever that would look like, despite the fact I wrote Dungeon Master costume for this segment in my script. So I'm just going to keep on with the theme of writing whatever it is I am on my chest, and then the video will end at some point. Alright, fucking class enchantments. I love these cards. I love the way that they combine the format of the original level up cards from Zendikar, which was originally supposed to be the D&D allegory set, you know, with quests and dungeons and all that good stuff, and a level up mechanic. I love how it combines that with the saga mechanic that we've seen since Dominaria, which has invariably been a fan favorite, and I don't think any set that has had sagas in it, the sagas have not been both loved and also really well utilised. Now, I had written an entire video's worth of words on class enchantments, trying to tie each section of them to some feature or mechanic of each individual class. But then I stumbled across Fjör Amies, and I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I will have all your socials on the screen now. Please go follow this wonderful, wonderful proxy artist. Her series of proxies where she took these class enchantments, gave them the 5e aesthetic treatment, and then tied each level to an individual mechanic or an individual feature of that class. I thought that was genius, and I agreed with all of her decisions. I thought, for example, her decision to say that the level 1 barbarian ability was a allegory for reckless attack. I had written that in my script. I fully agreed with her there. And I also thought that what was it? The fighter class first ability where you go and you search an equipment. I didn't know what that was supposed to represent, but she, again, completely hit the nail on the head where she said, this is choose your fighting style. You're going and finding an equipment. You're going to find your sword, your spear, your shield, what have you, to then equip onto your creature. That is a direct allegory for choose your fighting style, and it hadn't even occurred to me to link that up. So big up to Fjör, and please go check her work out on Twitter. She didn't do all of them though, and so I'm going to go through the ones that are remaining and try and work out what each specific level is. Starting with Warlock. Really annoyingly, the first level of Warlock is kind of tricky. The closest approximation I can think of is like Hexblade's Curse, or what was the other one? Dark One's Own Luck, that was it. Where when creatures die that have been, hit with the Hexblade Curse, you regain hit points. But of course, this first level is about when creatures die, your opponents lose health. I couldn't really think of like a tight allegory for that at like early Warlock level, and so that's kind of what I ended up having to go with, kind of an inverted Hexblade Curse or Dark One's Own Luck. The level 2 of this card, however, could be a reference to a multitude of things. When you are a Warlock at level 3, you get to pick, at least in the base game, between 3 different packed boons. So this could be an example of you looking at 3 things, and then you select one of them. You're picking between your 3 packed boons. It could also be a specific reference to the Pact of the Tome packed boon, which gives you 3 cantrips from outside of your Warlock class that you can pick from, and that's kind of like, you open up the book and you pick your cantrip for the day, and then you're going to be using that kind of stuff. For the last level of the Warlock class card, I couldn't really think of a tight allegory for it. The closest thing I could think of was just a Hellish Rebuke cast at higher level, wherein when something damages you, you get to damage it back, but that didn't seem particularly fitting, especially seeing as it's a first level spell. The closest approximation of a high-level Warlock-specific feature that I could find was, again, in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, which I needed to purchase as part of my job. HMRC, let me put this on my taxes, please. If you pick the Celestial as your otherworldly patron, when you're a Warlock, you get to pick a patron that's giving you all your powers, and if you pick a Celestial, you get access to Searing Vengeance, which, when you would die, you can instead just sort of like pop back to life, gain a bunch of health, and then everything around you, or is it everything around you, or just, yes, oh no, yeah, each creature within 30 feet of you takes 2d8 plus your charisma modifier radiant damage, which isn't like a one-to-one allegory, but it's kind of like when something deals you damage, when you go down to no life, you do get to deal damage back. I don't know, apart from the second level ability, all of the other ones seem to not really line up with anything that Warlocks actually do in-game. Also, I fully realised I was saying Dark One's Own Luck gives you gives you hit points when you slay a creature. That's not at all what Dark One's Own Luck does. I was thinking of Dark One's Blessing. I do apologise to all of my pedants who almost certainly have already typed out a lengthy paragraph in my comments saying that, what is this fucking dweeb think he's doing? He can't even get fucking the Dark One spells right, or the Dark One features correct for the Warlock subclass, and he's nitpicking D&D. Ooh! I know how you be, because I am you. Just sexy. Next, we have the Wizard class. Why did I start with W? This is very, very silly of me, but hey-ho, that's how past me did it, so that's how future me is going to do it, I guess. That's how time works. Much like a level 1 wizard in D&D, the first level of the Wizard class card gives you a spellbook effect. You start with a spellbook at level 1 as a wizard, and you get a spellbook effect at level 1 as a wizard. Perfect. Couldn't complain in any capacity about that one. However, when we move on to level 2 and level 3, level 2 you draw cards, which is, you know, that's kind of what that's a wizardy thing to do, but I would have loved to have seen, I don't know, maybe the choice on the card between picking enchantments, instants, or sorceries to then get a cost reduction on. Because the entire next section of you being a wizard is choosing your particular school of wizardry, which gives you very specific kinds of spells, but also reduces the casting cost and time taken to actually memorize and then replicate those spells. I think that could have been a tiny bit more flavorful there. And again, much like with the Warlock class, the level 3 isn't really an allegory for any specific class feature, but at least this one, to me, kind of captures the idea of how a wizard may level up, gets +1/+1 counters, by learning, by going through old tomes and discovering old secrets and old spells. If you are running a D&D campaign, it's really important actually that you separate how your players get experience. If you make all experience tied to combat, you're just going to engender a party of murder tourists. But if you have experience tied to things like you find a book and you spend a day reading it, and hey presto, that's given you a lot of experience because naturally that would do it, you will get much more interesting results with your parties when you are running a campaign. Just a little tidbit there. Next we have the Ranger class, and fun fact, if you're new to D&D, you might think that Rangers just naturally get an animal, much like they do in like World of Warcraft, for example, but it's actually only one specific subclass of Rangers that actually get a animal companion. And that animal companion has to be of challenge a quarter or lower, which includes things like rats, ponies, poisonous snakes, mastiffs, pankers, panthers, giant frogs, badgers, baboons, and of course, wolves. But you have to be a beastmaster for that. Level 2 shows how your furry friend grows alongside you, getting access to new abilities with exceptional training, or multi-attack through bestial fury as you level up. Level 3 of this card is the Feral Senses ability. In D&D, it allows you to see animals and see monsters that you otherwise might not be able to, and in Magic the Gathering, it lets you look at the top card of your library, something you would otherwise not be able to see, and see if there is a creature there. That works. That's fine. Mwah, I like that. Ranger is so far the cleanest and tightest of all of the class cards. Next we have Sorcerer, and this is the most disappointing one of the bunch so far in my opinion. I feel like this would have been the perfect opportunity to introduce a little bit of dice rolling into the class cards. Sorcerers are, at least if you pick, the wild magic like subclass of sorcerers, which let's face it, is the most fun one to pick. It's such a shame that this class card didn't break the mold and introduce a little bit of randomness into class cards. Like, I know drawing and discarding cards is kind of like randomness, and the storm counter type effect is a pretty good allegory for the 18th level ability Spell Bombardment. That, no complaints there, but I just feel that this was such a missed opportunity to really, really try something weird and off the wall for class cards. Sorcerers would have been the perfect place for it. And finally, we have Rogues. Okay, so the Rogue's level 1 ability lets your creatures steal cards from your opponents, not unlike how you as a level 1 Rogue gain proficiencies in Thieves' Tools. 100% beautiful allegory there, love that to bits. Level 2's Menace ability could well be an allegory for Uncanny Dodge or Evasion. It is literally an evasive mechanic after all. And level 3 could be a reference to the Imposter ability, which lets you gain the ability to, quote, unerringly mimic another person's speech. I'll move the book away from blocking me out with the microphone. The ability to unerringly mimic another person's speech, writing, and behavior. In effect, stealing your opponent's persona by stealing and casting spells from their deck. I like it. I like it. And those are all of the class cards. Again, please go check out Fier's work on Twitter. I'm also going to contact her after this and just ask how to pronounce her name. So there'll probably be bits of me like flying over the screen going, I've been informed by Fier to either call her Fire Ant Princess or, and in her own words, try and pronounce Fier Amies because me attempting to speak German would be very funny. So that's what we're going with. That whilst I'm doing this, but please go check out her work. It is absolutely fantastic. Give her a follow, she's great. But overall, I love these class cards. Obviously, things like Warlock and Sorcerer were a little bit of a letdown, not quite as close to a one-to-one allegory as other classes like Barbarians, but broadly speaking, I thought these were really, really fun additions to this set. My main complaint with the entire class system, however, is that I just wish that leveling up a class card was tied to something other than just putting mana into it. Like, the Barbarian class card could have been leveled up by destroying creatures in combat. The Ranger class card could have been leveled up by casting archers or casting beasts. Stuff like that would have just made the idea of leveling up as a druid or as a rogue, for example, feel like you genuinely were gaining experience as opposed to just pumping mana into something to have an effect. Also, do go check out Asian Represents, a podcast on the monk class in D&D. I had no idea where to put this little plug, but I thought I'd pop it in there. It's a fantastic wee episode specifically talking about the origins of the idea of the monk in D&D. A lot of people talking about how they use the class, how they alter the class to be a little bit less orientalist and stuff like that. It's a beautiful, beautiful episode. It comes highly recommended by me, the man who will never love you. Why did I say that? Also, I just realised I spent an entire section of a video talking about class and didn't mention communism once. You may thank me for my restraint in the comment section. Anyway, time to fucking dress up as a wizard, I guess, because we're doing blue cards next, baby. Let's blue! Okay, so this time I at least managed to get the word wizard on my tits correctly, and I did have my little wizard's prop, my little raven cane, but unfortunately I neglected to pick up any blue face paint to do a little like stripe over my eyes. So this is what we'll be running with instead. Not like the rest of the video's gone to plan, let's just roll with it. Our first blue card to talk about is the Black Staff of Waterdeep, which is a magical item found in the Dragon Heist adventure from 5th edition. Now, the staff itself does a whole variety of things, can cast a whole variety of magical spells, including gaining the ability to animate the semi-living statues that surround the city of Waterdeep. Broadly, this is a perfectly fine mechanical representation of the fundamental quality of this magical item. What is not captured in this card, however, is the fact that the Black Staff of Waterdeep is actually a sentient being that will literally stop working for you as soon as your goals stop aligning with its. It is a devious little bastard, and yes, it may have been silly to have included some kind of rules text on this card which meant that you as a player had to keep activating the staff or it would enter your opponent's control. However, that would have been more flavourful than dunking Guy Fieri's nuts in a tray of paprika, and thus it should have been included on the card. Demi-Lich is next, and you've certainly heard of a Lich. These sexy fucking boys. But did you know that, not unlike the banana that you might leave at the bottom of your school bag over the summer holidays, liches can grow deeply rotten and funky if left in the dark for too long. Some liches become demi-liches if they become trapped in a tomb for too long and their sanity frays and leaves them over the course of several thousand years. Others, like Aeswarak, which I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who is the lich that you can see on the front cover of the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition, choose to become demi-liches in order to renounce their physical body and transcend to a new higher and more dangerous plane of consciousness. Obviously, the demi-lich featured on this card isn't Ace-Rarak himself, although it does sport the kind of jeweled eyes and teeth of his lineage, suggesting that maybe this is one of Ace-Rarak's less famous cousins, or when I say cousin, a cousin! I was supposed to say apprentices, but I just quite like the idea of, like, you walk into a deli and there's just a bunch of liches just like, hey, you want some power word death? Oh, could I just get, I don't know, some, like, Hexblade's curse? Tony! What? Tony, this dumbass wants a fucking Hexblade curse! That's a level fucking 3 feet. That's not some kind of spell. We don't serve that. Get out of here, you bum! That was a weird bit. As for the card itself, having its casting cost reduced per the amount of spells that you've cast this turn doesn't really fit into any kind of, like, aspect of what liches or demi-liches are all about. They're not easier to find if you just shoot off a bunch of magic missiles. However, its ability to recast spells from your graveyard when it attacks is not too unlike the full array of spells that demi-liches have at their disposal, which they will barrage at you, the player, when you attempt to fight them. And indeed, demi-liches will return from the grave unless they are properly cleansed or exiled from this plane of existence. So most of the card, excellent. Not entirely sure about the casting cost thing. Very much just feels like a pushed mechanic to make the card good. And then it wasn't. And then no one played it, and what a sad time for Mr. Demi-Lich. Poor spherical bastard. Deplacer Beast is next, and not unlike Blink... Can we get the Deplacer Beast on the fucking green screen, please? I mean, it's not... Dragon Turtle is next, and the good of this card is that it joins the illustrious halls of Magic the Gathering creatures whose name exactly matches their creature type, joining the pantheon of such cards as Goblin Wizard, Zombie Assassin, and for some reason, not Giant Shark. Wizards, do you take me for a fool? The giant subtype is right there. Why is this just a shark? It is deeply important to me that this is errated immediately. The bad of this card has more to do with the limitations of Magic the Gathering's power and toughnesses. Dragon turtles are gargantuan behemoths of the deep who routinely crest waves and sink galleons full of treasure, and yet in Magic the Gathering this beast is apparently just as statistically as powerful as a particularly good boy. What makes this even funnier is that if you use the card Dragon's Fire, which I have no idea why it isn't called Breath Weapon, but you know, we move. If you use the card Dragon's Fire with Dragon Turtle, it implies that the breath weapon of a Dragon Turtle, which in D&D deals something like 15 d6 damage, that breath weapon in Magic the Gathering is somehow less powerful than whatever the fuck comes out of the mouth of this fucking theatre kid. I love that. Next up, I want to talk about Mind Flayer, and this card, at least to me, captures the feeling of a Magic the Gathering Dungeons & Dragons crossover more than any other card in the set. It has such a clean design, the gorgeous art by Darken, the beautiful symmetry here, the simple name, the simple ability that captures both the modus operandum of Mind Flayers, but also how they go about doing their evil deeds and why they go about doing it. I am genuinely enthralled by how clear and clean-cut the design of this specific card is, and I just wanted to take this moment to applaud everybody who was involved in the creation of this. To me, this is the titular Magic the Gathering D&D card. I love it to pieces. Mamma mia! They don't make them like that anymore. God, imagine if Italy was real. Wild. Ray of Frost, on the other hand, is an absolute disgrace. Okay, so first off, you have a clearly damage-dealing spell being bastardized into being some kind of like, what, tapping down ability. Ray of Frost can't freeze an enemy into place. If you wanted to have some kind of effect like that, you should have used something like Force Cage instead. And what's with the implication that red creatures are somehow more susceptible to frost damage? Fire elementals have no damage vulnerabilities, and you'd know that if you were a good games designer. Please, somebody take me seriously. I have precious little else to offer society. I am Scion of Stygia is our next card, and whilst Cone of Cold does freeze creatures into place, unlike Ray of Frost, you do have to kill the creature first in order to have any kind of freezing effect. So it's technically correct, but sort of like the timing's slightly off, if you know what I mean. What I really wanted to talk about with this card specifically, however, was its name. Now, if you are familiar at all with Greek myth, you can probably guess that Stygia is one of the levels of hell in D&D. It is an icy place overrun with imps and devils and ruled over by the Archduke Levistus. Many tieflings are scions or descendants from this place, and many of them owe their infernal mark to Levistus, who gave them infernal magics and allowed them to become tieflings. Okay, Shocking Grasp, again another D&D spell that has had its damage aspect removed, but we have discussed that before. The -2, -0 effect on Shocking Grasp I think is supposed to be a reference to the fact that if a creature is hit with Shocking Grasp, it can't take reactions on its turn, whereas -2, -0, at least to me, feels more like giving a creature disadvantage on attack rolls or something like that, as opposed to stopping it from taking reactions. I would say that a tap effect would make a lot more sense here. That being said, however, this is our first Magic the Gathering cantrip, meaning a spell that replaces itself in your hand, that is also a D&D cantrip. Cantrip referring to a very specific kind of spell that you can cast without expending a spell slot. Both words have two completely different meanings across both game systems, and yet they are unified here in Shocking Grasp. That is a delightful little touch. Little sprig of oregano on top of a mediocre pasta salad. Silver Raven, relevant prop. This metallic lovely is one of the many figurines of wondrous power that exist at various rarities throughout the world of the Forgotten Realms. The Silver Raven specifically is an uncommon, slight flavour fail there, but oh well, an uncommon figurine that when animated becomes a raven that can be the conduit of the Animal Messenger spell, which is a spell that allows an animal to receive and pass on information, which in my opinion neatly ties it to its Scry 1 effect, which is in a way of you, the player, finding information, seeking information that you otherwise might not have at the top of your deck. Another very clean card. Tasha's Hideous Laughter. This was one of the first cards that was previewed when this set was announced, and a couple of cards, I think it was this, Portable Hole, Flumph, and something else, I can't remember what. I think it was Lolth? I think the Spider Lady. I don't like the spider. Hey, Tony, do we have any meats for the Spider Lady? We need to stop doing this deli bit. Do you at least have the Demi-Lich? Do you mean Deli-Lich? Oh! Yeah, so this was one of the first spells that was sort of previewed at the start of this sort of like building up of hype of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and it was actually the card, that made me kind of want to make this video, because the way that this is presented in Magic makes it seem like Tasha's Hideous Laughter makes the sufferer, the victim of the spell, lose their mind. Of course, milling effects are synonymous with a creature losing its mind, losing its sanity, losing its memory, stuff like that. But really, all it is just sort of, it makes your... It's kind of like really aggressive hiccups with a little bit of laughter. You can't stop laughing. You don't actually go mad with laughter. You just like have an involuntary physical reaction. Like, as boring as it would be, Tasha's Hideous Laughter ought to be some kind of target creature can't block this turn type effect, or another tap down target creature effect. It wouldn't be nearly as iconic as the spell is in D&D, but I don't think that all iconic D&D spells translate well into being iconic Magic the Gathering cards. Their effects just don't translate in the same kind of powerful and exciting way. That's my perspective, at least. True Polymorph is our last blue spell, which means that after I stop talking about it, I can remove this from my forehead. True Polymorph in 5th edition doesn't last permanently, as it is implied to on the card in Magic the Gathering, but I do enjoy the fact that True Polymorph in 5th edition can transmute a living creature into an object into a living creature into another, object into another, and, you know, vice versa and all that good stuff, which has been adapted to mean that creatures and artifacts can be transformed into something that they're not, rather than just creatures, which was a lovely little touch. What this card absolutely should have had, however, is the rules text at the bottom. Shapeshifters have hexproof from this card, because of course, True Polymorph does not have any effect on shapeshifter type creatures. And that was such a niche nitpick that I think I shat myself in pleasure. Why did I say that? Next, moving away from all of the white legendary creatures, Grazilax, Illithid Scholar. Wow, definitely butchering that one.
So yeah, Grazilax is obviously an illithid, and if you don't know what an illithid is more commonly referred to as a mind flayer. I mean, they're generally speaking an evil race of creatures from the Underdark who have a hive mind that absorb energy of the brain by eating it out of your head, and they like stun people and use them as slaves. They're pretty terrible, but they just kind of match the general Underdark vibe, which is terrible. Grazilax, though, is a little bit different than that, which is, I feel like it's a bit rude for them to just like put a picture of him eating someone's brains without like really giving context to it. So he's part of a scholar society within the Neverwinter MMORPG. He's free from the hive mind control, because a couple of mind flayers do end up breaking away from that, especially ones who are more commonly mages, because mages are normally viewed as a bad thing within mind flayer society, because they're all normally psionic. They don't actually use magical or arcane power. They use the power of their eldritch horrorness, effectively. He basically broke away from like mind flayer society, and he eats people's brains, but he mostly eats bad people's brains, or he eats people's brains that he can like buy. So, like, he's not, like, a terrible person.
Ethical mind-eating.
Yeah, ethical mind-eating. And he is helpful within the MMORPG. He's not an enemy for you to fight. He is someone that you work with. And he also appears as a secondary character within the D&D module, the 5th edition, Out of the Abyss, which is you basically fighting demons and stuff. He also, at some point, helps out Drizzt Do'Urden to fight one of the demon gods, because this is D&D lore, almost everyone meets Drizzt at some point. As far as the abilities go, him being a researcher, so he lets you draw cards, and him being a mind flayer who can tap people out. I don't know how returning things to people's hands when they become blocked makes sense.
That mechanic, at least to me, seems to signify subterfuge. So I was going to assume that this person was some kind of like sneaky bastard in some capacity, because normally it's a case of if you're returning things to your hand during combat, it's that's a mechanic usually associated with ninjutsu, which is a mechanic all about if things aren't blocked, you can sort of sneakily swap in a ninja.
Yeah, I'm trying to think in my head how that exactly links to what I know of Grazilax, and he's somewhat stealthy about like him eating brains, but like he's not that stealthy about it.
Next we have Imrith. God, I'm butchering all of these. What's the deal with this dragon? Obviously, Icing Death was kind of like a footnote. Is this a more significant character?
Yeah. Imrith is a primary antagonist of the 5th edition module Storm King's Thunder. She's a blue dragon who basically has a dragon form, a giant form that she has, that she was using to worm her way into the Storm Giant Kingdom to, weasel her way into gaining tons of power and gold from them, and to push them towards violence and war during the module, which you as the heroes have to ultimately work to stop her, to root her out and then to hunt her down. I'm annoyed to see nothing mentioned of the subterfuge aspect. Like, her whole deal was initially that she was tricking a Kingdom of Storm giant. And they've apparently just skimmed that down to her having resistance to spells, which is not true. She has as much spell protection as an adult blue dragon has, which is limited at best. And drawing a card when they deal damage, also, I'm guessing maybe that's to emulate the fact that she has a dragon's horde, maybe?
Alright, next we have Mordenkainen, and this is someone that I kind of know a little bit about, but honestly not too much.
So, my notes for Mordenkainen are literally just, the guy. Come on, don't even need a reminder. And that is true. Mordenkainen is I would probably go as far to say that he probably is one of the most fundamental characters in the entirety of D&D. Mordenkainen is one of the OG wizards. He was one of those wizards that was created back when D&D was just Gary Gygax and a bunch of his friends sitting around a table making up characters as part of this new role-playing game that they've created between themselves. He has ultimately been transformed since that time of him being a player character into just being sort of the guy whose whole job is trying to preserve the balance of the multiverse. So he basically goes around trying to make sure that there is an equivalent amount of good and evil so that they kind of balance each other out. So that, because he thinks that if one side gets too much power, then power will corrupt and they'll, destroy the multiverse or something. Seems to be his jam.
Radical centrist, no!
But what it mostly translates to in the series is him being absolutely useless.
He is a radical centrist.
Most of the time, he either gets like betrayed and like ends up just like running away and hiding somewhere because he doesn't care enough, or he like ends up sort of going, what do I do here? Because the balance is vague on this one. I'm just going to choose to do nothing, actually, I think, here. I'm just going to walk away from this. But as it goes, it makes sense for him to be this powerful because, like I said, he is probably the most powerful wizard in the entire D&D lore. It's weird he's got less powerful over time because mages have been brought down from the heights they were at in first edition, especially during a lot of like the lore stuff. So he's scaled down in power somewhat, to the point that he got beaten up by Strahd in the new module 5th edition.
Oh, the deep burn. If only I knew who Strahd was.
Strahd should be in this set, if I'm going to be real with you here, and the fact he's not included is a disgrace. He is the vampire. But his abilities make sense. Like, drawing 2 cards, he's a mage. He does research. His whole deal is, like, he has massive libraries and stuff. He's literally on the front of one of the Mordenkainen's Tomb of Foes. Like, he is literally, like, a character on one of the supplements. The dog illusion thing is a reference to Mordenkainen's Phantasmal Hounds, which is, like, a low-tier spell he has that summons a ghost dog, the one that you see in the picture. But it's kind of cool that it's linked to the, like, number of cards in your hand, because I guess in this sort of sense, like, the number of cards in your hands might, like, match, like, your spell power, or like how many like spells you have or whatnot, so that kind of like equals a spell slot, I guess, in this sort of like sense. And exchanging your hand on the library is basically, I mean, that's basically them just saying like, yeah, he's the most powerful wizard of all time. Like, he has a library filled with information about almost everything across the multiverse. He has everything like recorded somewhere, basically. Even if he doesn't do anything with it, he has it recorded somewhere.
Each new color, a new cosplay. Each new cosplay, a new masterpiece. To start off with the black card, we're going to be talking about the Book of Vile Darkness and also Vecna's other bits and bobs. Okay, let's start with the hand, which is the most cut and dry of the bunch. It does indeed increase your damage when you have it equipped, although only by a flat 2d8 cold damage, as opposed to anything to do with your int or wisdom modifier, as is suggested by the plus X power, where X is the number of cards in your hand, bit of rules text. The Eyes Draw a Card effect could well be a reference to the fact that the Eye of Vecna comes with charges of the spell Clairvoyance, which is kind of like drawing a card in Magic as an allegory goes, and the fact that the eye causes you to lose life could well be a reference to the fact that you have to gouge out your own eye in order to equip it. Yeah, the fact that someone's attaching the hand of Vecna to the stump of their arm isn't some kind of artistic choice. In the game of D&D, the only way to equip these items is to literally dismember and disfigure yourself, and if you ever try and take them off, you are immediately killed. And on top of that, the eye has a 5% chance of, whenever you cast a spell using it, of Vecna possessing your body and taking you over in the game. This possessing aspect of the eye could well be where the Book of Vile Darkness gets its Vecna Exodia style ability, as whilst the Book of Vile Darkness certainly can contain and often will contain horrifying zombifying and necromancy magic, there is no rule in the Dungeons Master's Guide that says that by gathering the eye, hand, and dream journal of the Betrayer God together, he'll come pay you a visit. That being said, the Book of Vile Darkness, along with the Book of Exalted Deeds, the rest of Vecna's bits and bobs, and also the Orb of Dragonkind, which we'll get onto in a little bit, are all listed in a section of the Dungeon Master's Guide called Sample Artifacts, the subheading of which reads, "The artifacts presented here have appeared in one or more D&D worlds. Use them as guides when creating your own artifacts or modify them as you see fit." And that's the beautiful thing about mystical, rare, magical artifacts in D&D. Yes, there are a series of rules written for them, but if you do gather the eye, the hand, and the Book of Vecna in your campaign, it's completely up to the DM's discretion as to whether or not that would have some kind of effect when it comes to trying to communicate, summon, or destroy Vecna. So I'm willing to give that a big old pass. And in fact, that's something that I'd like to say for all of my nitpicks, especially for legendary items. It's that they can be modified. D&D is a very fluid thing. I have been binge watching all of the Dimension 20 seasons using various different systems, but seeing how D&D has been applied to a John Hughes style setting or a mystical New York setting, you can see how the rules of the game can be adapted, how magical items can be modified by just a very good DM and the best character actor in all of fucking time. Lou Wilson, you are a fucking king among men. The next card is Dungeon Crawler. Dungeon Crawler is both a zombie that is crawling in a dungeon, but also the term given to a certain subgenre of games about exploring dungeons, which could well be a description for many Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. It's really funny when people explain jokes to you, isn't it? Okay, Eyes of the Beholder is next, and first off, this card gives a delightful -11, -11, which is of course a reference to the fact that beholders have 11 eyes, 10 stalks and one in the middle, but it's a subtle reference to something else as well. This is of course a reference to the 12th Night, where the line, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder," is first said. And it was in an amateur production of the 12th Night where the original designers of Dungeons and Dragons first met and first concocted this tabletop role-playing game that we have all come to know and love. Did you look up to find out that I was lying? Yeah, because I was. I wanted you to feel the disappointment that I felt when reading this fucking awful pun, both in the title and in the flavour text. Stop making puns and I'll stop upsetting my audience, wizards. Gelatinous cube! Gelatinous cube! Baby! It's a fucking box! The way that this card represents the two big things about gelatinous cubes, their trapping of creatures and then the dissolving of them is just beautifully represented in this exile effect and then a delayed sort of processing of the creature and putting it into the opponent's graveyard, giving the opponent's creatures, their party, and of course the opponent themselves, time to try and kill the cube and free their companion. I think that is a fantastic piece of design. My only complaint about this card is the fact that it's, for some reason, a 4-3 and not a 4-4, which is obviously the most cube-like fucking power and toughness that you could have given it. It's really infuriating that it's a fucking unmatched pair of power and toughnesses, but apart from that, I love this fucking boy. Baby! Also, you might notice that my voice is a little bit more strained and textured in this Warlock and the Wizard section, as opposed to the Cleric and the DM one before, and that's because I'm shooting on different days, and this is the day after Halloween, where on Halloween I went to a very, very good drag show, and blew my voice out, yelling for what I seem to remember was a Bloodborne act. Like, a fucking queen came on and started lip-syncing to the speech that Gehrman gives you as he goes to, like, take your head off, and I lost my fucking shit. I was also dressed as the Spectre of Communism, but that's neither here nor there. Power Word Kill is our next black card, and unfortunately this spell has not translated well between Magic the Gathering and D&D. First off, it is a 9th level enchantment. Power Word Kill is one of the most powerful spells that you can learn at 9th level, and here it's a uncommon 2-mana removal spell, which just doesn't stack up right in my head. It's like the Dragon Turtle only having 3 power. It's not congruent. But additionally, Power Word Kill does not function in the sense that it cannot kill devils, demons, angels, or dragons in D&D. It is true that a great number of those creatures will not be able to be killed by this spell. However, it has nothing to do with the fact that they are the creatures that they are. Power Word Kill can kill any creature, regardless of its type, provided that it has 100 hit points or less. Be that in the case that it just naturally has a maximum HP that's below that, or that it has been weakened to a point where it only has 99 or less hit points. As great as this spell is, and as fucking bonkers as it is in Limited, this card kills like almost everything in this format. Unfortunately, it's just not an accurate representation of how this spell works in D&D. A far more accurate representation would have been something along the lines of destroying creatures or exiling creatures based on their toughness. If a creature has 2 toughness or less, it is exiled. Not particularly flashy, but a far more accurate and flavorful representation of how this spell actually works. Ray of Enfeeblement. Okay, what? See? You're taking me for a bloomin' ride now, aren't you? Ray of Frost was a damage spell that got turned into a tapping spell, and now Ray of Enfeeblement is a strength weakening spell that for some reason also now affects toughness? What's next? Fucking Hunter's Mark being targeted color hate, despite the fact that that spell has no pretense of such an ability in the player's handbook. Oh, why must I manifest that which hurts me? Sphere of Annihilation is represented in a fantastic capacity for the most part with this card. It only affects living creatures, which is a very notable component of this item. It enters with counters, showcasing the fact that the elf in the foreground is controlling the sphere, deciding who it is that is going to be affected by it. All of this is fantastic thus far, but wizards! Sphere of Annihilation is literally a legendary item in the handbook. It's legendary. Where is the legendary keyword, wizards? You buffoons! You dweebs! I am literally vomiting and shitting right now. That's how upset I am. Our final black card that we'll be talking about is Vorpal Sword. Now, Vorpal Sword was one of the first cards that was previewed in this the preview season of this set. It gives you +3 to hit and also to damage rolls, which is, in my opinion, perfectly reflected in the fact that the card Vorpal Sword gives you +2 to the equipped creature's power, but also Death Touch, kind of making up that additional point to hit, and also then following through on the fact that it is a sword that can hit harder and more readily, just like Death Touch being able to kill a lot of things generally. What I am disappointed by, and I think one of the biggest disappointments I have in this set, is the fact that the Vorpal Swords, the player that is damaged by the sword loses the game ability, is not tied to a roll of a d20, and instead tied to just pumping a lot of mana into it, which is always the most boring way of activating an ability. It would have made this card wild if whenever you attacked with it, you rolled a d20 to see if the player that was going to be dealt damage with it lost the game, because it would have made every combat step an absolute nightmare. Like, do you chump block on turn 2 and throw your mana dork in front of a first striking creature that has the Vorpal Sword, just on the 1 in 20 chance that if you don't, you will lose the game then and there? It would have made it a ridiculous card, a very stupid card, but also an amazingly fun card.
So next on the list, we're moving away from the blue cards now and onto the black cards. Oh boy, it's another name I'm going to have to try and pronounce. Ace-Rirak, the Archlich.
Yeah, so Acererak is another character where my notes just say the Lich, because that is true. He is basically the seminal Lich. Like, he goes way back into the lore as far as like a Lich that appears that people fight or that people deal with. He was a huge evil guy across multiple modules, across multiple lore things. His main primary thing that everyone knows him for is causing the Curse of Death, which basically meant that everyone who'd ever been revived slowly withered and died, and anyone who died stayed dead, effectively. As is mentioned in the thing, and that actually kind of makes a lot of sense, he created the Tomb of Annihilation. That's his dungeon that he made. Yeah, that was basically a setup for him to, like, that's where he stores away his Demi-Lich form, so when he's killed, he basically reappears there in a Demi-Lich form, absorbs all the souls of people that have been killed there, and then comes back to being a Lich again. And he is a necromancer, so him creating zombies makes a lot of sense. That's his deal. That's kind of what he does. The only criticism I would have of this card at all, and it's a minor criticism, is he's not a zombie. He is an undead. He is a horror, I might so go so far to venture. Liches aren't zombies, though. In the D&D lore, there is a very clear line between what is a zombie and what isn't a zombie. Zombies are mindless automatons that are created from the dead remains of something and are then controlled by a spell that gives them an idea of what to do. But every undead that isn't a zombie, that has a name, is generally considered to have minds. They have stuff. They have thoughts. They have desires. They have ideas. They wouldn't be called zombies because that would be ridiculous within the lore, because zombies have been established to be the just recreated, reanimated versions of undead things.
Next, we have Asmodeus. No, that's easy. Asmodeus the Archfiend. I've got it. He is a 6-mana, 6/6 devil god, which, like, the history of Magic the Gathering being something that a lot of evangelical extremist white people in America thought was going to, like, turn their children into Satan worshippers. Had this been released back in the day, I think Magic would have just stopped being a thing.
So so as they said, Asmodeus is the god of devils, and I'm happy they called him a devil, because a lot of times when people translate, they end up confusing devils and demons. Devils are lawful, demons are chaotic. They are, if anything, opposed forces. Don't confuse those two. So yeah, Asmodeus is the ruler of the 9 hells. He rules the 9th layer of it, and from there he basically commands all other archdemons that exist within every single plane leading up to that. But so the whole idea of him having that bunker as well. So he's got his little staff he's holding there. Effectively, his rod was given to him by the Primus of Mechanis, who Primus is effectively the ruler of the Modrons. He is the godlike ruler of what is order and law within the universe. Technically speaking, he's the one who creates what number die should your mace roll when it hits someone. Primus ended up making the rule that, okay, yes, you do have a role within the universe, that is your purpose, but I'm going to give you this rod that effectively makes it so that any deals that you or any devil make are binding. You must follow the letter of the rule or the contract that you've created. Obviously, the letter of it means there's a lot of interpretations around that. There's a lot of ways you can get around that with like sneaky wordplay and stuff. It was a way to try to keep them in check, effectively, to ensure that when people go to devils, they have an idea that, okay, I can make a deal and possibly this could come in my favour. And if any devil breaks the contract, Asmodeus appears and hits them with the rod, smites them with the rod. Yeah, he's the way that his thing works with like you're cutting a deal to effectively try to get cards quickly into your hands, but you're getting them exiled so they come back to your hands if you lose a life to get them in there is kind of like that tracks. Asmodeus is yet again the first person on this list of characters where I looked at it and went, why isn't he a planeswalker? He's a super powerful creature within the universe. He's way more powerful, if not equivalent of power, to like any of the people like I've seen before that are planeswalkers, like Mordenkainen and stuff. What?
Well, we'll come to the Black Planeswalker in a hot second. We'll do some comparison. But first, we have another dragon. This is Ebon Death, Draco Lich, 4 mana for a 5/2, zombie dragon, another zombie lich, who has, even though he looks more like a skeleton to me, but go off.
His full real name is not Ebon Death, it's Chardan Sira Vitriol.
Chardan Sira Vitriol. I'm pretty sure I encounter that every time I log on Twitter.
But he basically, he was a dragon that transformed himself into a lich, which is something that a dragon can do. Oftentimes it happens when a dragon is feeling afraid of dying. It's normally considered an abomination, and basically every other dragon looks upon it pretty horrified. If they get like old enough and enough power and they feel afraid of death, they can basically put that magical power they've got together to ensure that their soul is effectively trapped within a gem or within a specific powerful enough object that allows them to reform again. His character thing here for Ebon Death does quite emulate that quite well, with the fact that he can come back from the graveyard. So that all tracks as far as that goes. And the only issue I have here is, yet again, not a zombie.
Lolth the Spider Queen, or Lolth Spider Queen.
So, Lolth is going to be one of those characters where she has so much lore that I'm going to have to try to condense that down into a very brief summary of it. Short version, she was one of the original elves that was created during the big battle that Corellion Leferion, the elvish god, had with the orcish god Grumsh. Corellion Leferion took out Grumsh's eye. Grumsh took a few hits to Corellion, who bled a little bit. The blood that he bled ended up turning into the original elves. From these original elves, the most powerful ones ended up becoming the Seldarine, which were effectively a pantheon that followed him around. Lolth was ultimately ended up corrupting a bunch of the Seldarine in her attempt to effectively fight Corellion, and was cast out. And Corellion basically just got like sulky and now doesn't talk to the elves anymore, and bounced off. And Lolth basically fled into the Underdark with the other Seldarine, and the Drow, which is how the Drow were formed, the Dark Elves, was because they were the ones that followed Lolth during that big split between the Elfish pantheon. She turned into a spider when she effectively went into one of the Abyss planes and fought the original abyssal entity that represented spiders and webs. She fought and killed them, taking their plane for herself, and ultimately becoming a spider through that. And representing more of a spider because she ended up taking a chaotic abyssal plane of evil that she ended up staying on, and it corrupted her nature, so she became a chaotic evil character. So she is a planeswalker, that tracks. She moves through planes, that completely makes sense. And she her thing of creatures you control dying to put loyalty counters on her actually kind of makes a lot of sense, because basically she is the demanding god of the Drow. Drow society, if you don't know, sucks. The whole deal is that everyone is trying to gain power for themselves. It's a very narcissistic, self-centered society. The whole point is you're trying to gain power, but you have to worship Lolth. You have to worship her and give sacrifices to her and make sure that every success you have, you say it's all because of the Spider Queen, because if you don't, she will do something terrible to you. She'll either summon down a plague on your house, or she'll make some terrible thing happen that will ultimately ruin your fortunes, or if she's feeling really bad, she'll transform you by turning you into a Drider, which is a drown mixed with a spider, and it's like a horrific, painful, torturous existence. But like her demands of the Drow society translating into her basically being like a case of like when people die, she gets power, makes sense because she is a consuming monster at the center of Drow society, turning the entire people into effectively a nightmare mess of slavery and backstabbery, and no one ever really advances properly because they're always looking out for their back, always looking forward to when they're going to get, ultimately, eventually betrayed by Lolth. Her also, like, letting you draw a card, but you lose a life for it, makes sense because she gives you power, but she also takes as she gives. Creating spiders, she's a spider person. I don't know what else you want.
So sometimes analysis can literally be, she's a spider, she makes spiders. What do you want from me?
She controls the plane of webs. She does spidery things. There's a limited amount of power that goes, analysis that can go on there. Yeah, and then I think the emblem that she gets is, I suppose, emulates in my brain the idea of she is controls a group of people, and if they call upon her power to help them fight their enemies, then she can give them a great amount of aid in that sort of sense. So I think that's probably what it's just emulating the fact, trying to emulate the status that she has within Drow society as their guardian god almost.
And that's the black cards done. But now we're going to move on to Foolish adventurer, did you think that me, the Grand Wizard, not Grand Wizard, sorry, I'm ad-libbing this bit, that's got connotations, doesn't it? Foolish adventurer, did you really think that this boss would not have two phases? I've used my legendary action on your turn to split this video into two parts. If you want to see the rest of this bedraggled bastard's nitpicking, you'll have to come back next month. Ha 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 ha! Oh ho ho ho! Or it'll be maybe a week or two. Probably before Christmas will be when I have the whole thing out. It's just a very long video. I decided to split into two pieces. This bit wasn't conceived particularly well, I must admit. Anyway, now that I have trapped the soul of Spice 8-Rack in this digital phylactery, it's time for me to supplant him in this mortal world and take over his position. And I will start to do that by first reading the Patreon credits for this video. So a very special thank you to all of my patrons who support me doing this as a full-time job. Thank you very much, really appreciate you. And an extra special thank you to all of my $10 patrons, who include, and there's a lot of you, hot dang, A Fool of Five Colors, a gay American couple, Akumi the Reaper, Adam Gable, AJ Ingram, Alex Berman, Alex Flynn, Alice Perales, an old right sleeper agent who gives money to communist Booker Idaka, probably tilts for Sona, Alison Steele, an Umbreon Pastry, Aura Brexis Siberia, Bambi Ward, Basu Gasu Baku Hatsu Baku Matsu, nailed it, Benjamin Easter, Biscuit Blade, Blake Evers, Bradley Rose, Brian Dunn, Kalulu, Chase Beard, Charles Cohen, Charles McElrath, Chris DeVos, Cerso Ceresa, Cloud Chaser Kestrel, Cognitive Glitch, Deadpan Goth, Duncan, Dystopico, Exidian, Alfonsi, Erica Valentine, Erin, Ethan Abraham, Everybody Loves Robots, Faxel, Felix Mortem, Fiona Perry, Fiona, Fofa, Foxy Dean, Future Beagle, Grey Days, Hypercube MTG. I am saying this only because our global economic system does not intrinsically support artistic expression. I want Emrakul to dominate me. In response, I bolt myself. In response, table flip. We've got a little bit of lore going on in the credits. Jake Colburn, Jennifer Klein, Jessica Settle, Johnny Rifle, Joshua M. Stephan, Julius Home, Just Mild Lilac, Carlia Whithard, Caitlin Evers, Kate B, Koo Zombie, Kurd Ape Apologizer, Kyle Denley,
Leliana, Lily of the North Star, literally a ghost that pushes over candles. Linnea, Madame Monroe, Magic Arcanum, Matthew Marks, Matthew Short, Max Cooper, Mike Mavramatis, Mr. Skolaton, N. Ben, Okami, Omar Altibahi, Oops Alsini, Pappy Markov was a mistake, Peter Carter, Phoenix Swans, Romeo Joe, Singularity but the I is a 1, Samuel Kona, Several Goblins in a Trench Coat, Sky Johnson, Steve Pospeach, who is still hoping for a new not broken 4-colour Omnath. Keep dreaming, Steve, you fucking madman. Swan Hunter, Synthetic Evil 13, Tally E. Sin, Tanner Matone, Taylor Street, Ted Cruz, the ghost of Karl Marx in 4D, the Hermit Crab Goddess, the Jelly Bean Warlock, Thelon, the Reaper of You, Totally a Spy, Travis K, Trey Ernst, Trey Parker, Untap Upkeep Lose, Venser, Vladimir Gorvikov, Wesley, that monologuing communist, Why Does John Aben Always Lose? He mostly draws lands, yes I stole that joke, shoot me. I hope the rest of my patrons don't get any ideas about artificially lengthening their names to full gags. Xenon and Xanaron. And a massive thank you to all of my other patrons. A massive thank you to Lily. Please go check her work out on the old Twitters, the old YouTubes. And yeah, I'll see you sometime next month for the thrilling conclusion to this very long video.